Last weekend, social media was alight with reactions to the annual MTV Video Music Awards. Mainly because social media was surprised that they are still having the MTV Video Music Awards. Taylor Swift cemented her place as the most overrated performer of all time, with a win for the 10-minute version of All Too Well. Yet another song where she speaks with music in the background and calls it singing. How's that for casually cruel? While other winners included Maneskin with their racially inclusive throwback I Wanna Be Your Slave, Lizzo stole the show after winning MTV's Video for Good award for her song About Damn Time. The song is now available exclusively on the Food Network. She arrived at the event wearing an outfit sponsored by the trash bag giant Hefty. Apparently, several workers suffocated to death during its construction. After the award show, Lizzo announced that the dress will be donated to the state of Washington to keep it dry during the winter. After singing a few bars of her hit song, which includes the lines, I'm coming out tonight, her performance took a break because a forklift was required to actually get her out tonight. She then mimicked Tom Hanks in 1988's Big, playing a light-up floor piano with her feet. Unfortunately, this led to a brief interruption as local seismologists rushed in believing a deadly earthquake had struck the theatre. An oddest mistake given the audible terror of the audience. During her acceptance speech, which was also cut short because the steel struts holding up the stage started to buckle, she called on her fans to vote to change the laws that are oppressing us. Lizzo, who's famous for being morbidly obese, later explained that she was speaking out, of course, against exercise-related legislation, especially Ron DeSantis and his fascist jogging laws. Honestly, there's a ton more we could have done here because Lizzo weighs a literal ton. And then there's Amber Heard's sister, who I'd never heard of, so let's just call her Amber Heard's number 2. Amber Heard's number 2 bobbed to the surface to condemn MTV for featuring Johnny Depp. She wrote, MTV, you're disgusting and clearly desperate. I really hope that none of the people that made this call have daughters. Before she applauded Nicki Minaj, who sang her hit song about sex with a man with a giant penis. I'm Ian Haworth, and this is Off Limits. Welcome to episode 6. Unfortunately, I'm oppressed. Like totally oppressed. I'm not exactly sure how or why, but I know that I'm a victim. But your support matters to me, and you can express your support by liking this video, subscribing to the YouTube channel, hitting the bell for notifications, and telling everyone you meet for the rest of your life to do the same. On the subject of victimhood, in her continued search for privacy from the media, B-list actress Meghan Markle appeared for yet another interview, this time with New York Magazine's The Cut. So much privacy. In fact, nothing says privacy like a 6,000-word interview, accompanied by multiple photographs which required a personal stylist, hair color stylist, makeup artist, tailor, and a set designer. Privacy. Meghan's notorious quest for privacy continued, announcing with eyes that were, quote, alight and devilish, that she's getting back on Instagram, a well-known platform for those who just want to be left alone. After complaining about the royal family, a centuries-long institution she voluntarily joined and was surprised to find out came with responsibilities that didn't include doing whatever you want while being waited on hand and foot and having the public who pay for your lifestyle celebrate you for it, she then began to complain about the stress of searching for a home in California and how she and her captive husband finally managed to scrape together enough cash to buy a fixer-upper for $14 million. The housing crisis truly affects us all. But perhaps the most ridiculous part of this, again 6,000-plus word article, was Meghan Markle's claim that a South African cast member from The Lion King pulled her aside at the premiere in London and said, quote, I just need you to know, when you married into this family, we rejoiced in the streets, the same way we did when Mandela was freed from prison. Because nothing says grounded and humble, like a woman living off the notoriety of her pussy-whipped husband after isolating him from his relatives and living in a $14 million mansion in California while bitching about not being able to have an Instagram account after willingly marrying into the royal family before squeezing out a few kids that you celebrate as biracial despite them being whiter than me before the inevitable marriage collapse and public divorce leads to a multi-million-dollar 3-book deal, uncovering the truth about Prince Harry and his history of misogyny and abuse, after which she'll marry her third husband, who will help her continue pursuit of talentless fame, while also comparing yourself to a man who spent 27 years in prison in apartheid South Africa before uniting the country in the years that followed through a program of racial reconciliation. You think Nelson Mandela had it bad rotting in prison for decades. Meghan Markle couldn't even tweet for a few years. Now please, leave her alone. She just wants some privacy. Finland's Prime Minister, Sanna Marin, has exposed a growing cultural divide in her Scandinavian country after videos leaked of her, as the New York Times put it, dancing boisterously at a party. Some have applauded her behavior, while others have argued that it's not appropriate for the nation's leader to be seen dancing while intoxicated. Among her biggest critics were male politicians whose honor and virtue is deserving of the office they hold. It's one thing for a man to say, grind on another guy naked, or grope a sleeping woman, or cheat on all your wives, or sex teenage girls, or get a blowjob in the Oval Office from an employee, but dancing? That's crossed a line. European leaders like Nicolas Sarkozy and Silvio Berlusconi were just as outraged, while Boris Johnson, who was in between holding a party during a nationwide lockdown and trying to get a government job for a woman he was having an affair with, called Marin a disgusting trollop undeserving of her position. This has to stop. Even if women like Marin are fulfilling all of their professional duties, including leading their country through the COVID-19 pandemic with one of the lowest death rates in Europe, we simply cannot live in a world where they are also allowed to dance recreationally in their spare time. And because everyone in politics is a narcissistic attention whore, people immediately rush to post pictures of themselves dancing to try and get a touch of the spotlight. Leading the charge was failed presidential candidate and part-time Nazgul Hillary Clinton, who shared a picture of herself flailing her limbs around while on a trip to Colombia as Secretary of State in 2012. She told Marin Sana to keep dancing, before it was then discovered that the Finnish politician had previously accused Bill Clinton of rape. A few days later, Marin was found dead, having thrown herself across 4 lanes of traffic while asleep. She also forgot to mention that the song she was dancing to in Colombia was Murder on the Dance Floor, followed soon by Hillary's other favorites, including Killer Queen and Smooth Criminal. Hillary Clinton will also be hosting a show on Apple TV alongside her daughter titled Gutsy, an 8-part docuseries following Hillary and Chelsea on their, quote, thought-provoking journey to speak with pioneering women artists, activists, community leaders, and everyday heroes who show us what it truly means to be gutsy. Weirdly, Juanita Broaddrick was left out. And in case you missed it, in a bid to help him fight off John Fetterman to remain just the weirdest Democrat out there, Joe Biden's family are pitching in. It now appears that law enforcement have verified the authenticity of a handwritten diary belonging to Ashley Biden, the president's youngest daughter, who wrote that she showered with her dad at a young age. When questioned about it, Joe Biden responded with a wistful grin, before his comms team rushed in to argue that Biden was actually decades ahead of us when it comes to climate change, and that he routinely showered with all his children in a bid to save water. Apparently, the diary was found under a mattress in a rental home weeks after the president's daughter had stayed there. When he heard the news, Hunter Biden suggested that she uses a laptop for all her future correspondence, as it's way safer. After growing bored of criticizing the MAGA movement, the Biden White House has started to get a bit more specific with its condemnation. Back in May, Biden warned against Ultra MAGA, which is like regular MAGA, except it's only 95 calories. And now things have deflated a bit after Biden referred to MAGA as a semi-fascist movement. Trump immediately responded to this insult by pounding Viagra, telling anyone who would listen that there's nothing worse than a semi as you're closing in on your goal. The New York Times pounced on the news, calling it the latest example of erection fraud from the former president. And Novak Djokovic has not been allowed to travel to New York to compete in the US Open because he's unvaccinated. However, Novako Djokovic was able to fly into Mexico City and then walk across the border to Texas, where a bus was waiting to transport the Mexican tennis star to New York City in time for the competition, along with 500 pounds of fentanyl and a dozen new Biden voters. Now, this week, Taylor Lorenz over at the Washington Post was horrified to find out that conservative groups sell merchandise to grow their audience. Of course, the Washington Post would never do anything as shameless as to try and profit off their work, except for charging you to read their stuff, of course. Well, here at Off Limits, we have no shame, so head over to watchofflimits.com/shop and check out our fundraising products. Our latest I Survive Fauci line, including t-shirts, hoodies, stickers, bags, and much more, is sure to upset good old Taylor Lorenz. What other motivation could you possibly want? And speaking of Fauci, he really is just the worst. Last week, we covered the news that Anthony Fauci will be stepping down in December to spend more time staring adoringly into a mirror. And honestly, we needed more time to do Fauci and his legacy justice. And by justice, we mean giving you the truth about the man the mainstream media still celebrates as a god among men, a celebrity of on-screen science, or even as the science itself. But unlike famous doctors who save lives like Doogie Howser, JD, and most of the time House, Fauci actually deserves to be among a different crowd, maybe more like Dr. Evil, Dr. Huxtable, or Dr. Hannibal Lecter, because he's done way more damage than all of them combined. Also, at least Hannibal was smart and helped solve crimes, because Fauci is actually just terrible, for 3 reasons. Well, 3 reasons we have time for. First, his job throughout the pandemic was to serve as the head of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, or NIAID, and to be chief medical advisor to the White House under President Donald Trump and then President Joe Biden. But instead, or if we're being kind at the same time, he was catapulted to the forefront of our COVID culture, and turned into an overnight celebrity of the science. And my problem here is not that this happened necessarily. After all, America is obsessed with the cult of celebrity, and people are routinely pushed to the forefront of the national conversation as the face of an issue, whether they want to or not. No, my problem is that Fauci, a self-proclaimed man of science, integrity, and truth, embraced the celebrity. If anything, he fueled it. As the pandemic grew, so did his ego, getting to a point where the daily COVID briefings became a battle of who thinks they're best, Donald Trump or Anthony Fauci. A battle royale with cheese, if you will. And like ER doctors and nurses who said they were being worked way too hard during the pandemic but still had time to record fully choreographed TikToks, Fauci somehow found time in his packed schedule to push his own brand. And I'm not talking about his appearances on news outlets because that's part of his job. I'm talking about the hundreds of other media events which fall more into the bucket of public relations than informing the public. How did he have time to give lectures, attend panel discussions, give speeches? How did he have time to star in Fauci, a National Geographic documentary which was filmed in secret during an ongoing global pandemic? How did he have time to pose for photoshoot after photoshoot after photoshoot? And this was all while he was just so full of himself, even having a picture of himself on his office wall, which weirdly grows older as he gets more powerful. According to the mainstream media, Fauci was a beacon of truth shining through the foggy propaganda of the Trump administration, and then the ongoing semi-fascist MAGA crowd of the Biden era. But there's just one problem, which brings us to the second reason Fauci is just the worst. He's terrible at his job, because his job ended up being to spout self-aggrandizing platitudes to err on the side of his own safety, while also taking no responsibility for the consequences. In the early days of COVID-19, he said that it wasn't a major threat.
Dr. Fauci, coronavirus, of course, has been in the news so much. People are worried. Should they be worried? Are they worried unnecessarily? And what should they be doing?
No, I don't think people should be frightened. I mean, the risk right now, today, currently, is really relatively low for the American public, but that could change. So right now, don't worry about it. Be more concerned about influenza, which is going into a second peak for the season.
Then, almost overnight, he decided that it was. He also initially declared that Americans shouldn't wear masks.
Right now, people should not be walking. There's no reason to be walking around with a mask. When you're in the middle of an outbreak, wearing a mask might make people feel a little bit better, and it might even block a droplet, but it's not providing the perfect protection that people think that it is.
But yet again, he flipped, arguing in favor of masks, double masking, and then full-body condoms. And when he was asked why Americans weren't advised to wear masks from the start, he explained that he effectively lied to protect medical supplies.
Well, the reason for that is that we were concerned, the public health community, and many people were saying this, were concerned that it was at a time when personal protective equipment, including the N95 masks and the surgical masks, were in very short supply. And we wanted to make sure that the people, namely the healthcare workers, who were brave enough to put themselves in harm's way to take care of people who were infected with the coronavirus and the danger of them getting infected.
Which is, let's be honest, way worse than the normal incompetence we see in the federal government. He knew he was lying, but he did it anyway, disrespecting and manipulating the American people to basically play politics. And throughout the pandemic, Fauci kept screwing up and kept claiming that it wasn't he that was wrong, it was just the science that had changed. Don't believe your lying eyes. He called for contact tracing, so the CDC doled out $631 million in April 2020, while some states spent millions of dollars developing contact tracing apps. None of it worked. He called for a complete shutdown of the economy and the closure of schools, leading to voluntary economic collapse and unemployment, let alone the mental health implications of forcing people in their homes for months on end. He dismissed calls for a nuanced or science-based approach which focused on the vulnerable. He dismissed the idea that natural immunity existed, even though he pushed that idea at one point too, and all while in private doubting the efficacy of masks and things like asymptomatic spread. But it's not even like Fauci had a stellar career until COVID-19. Under his leadership, the NIAID spent billions on defense against bioterrorist attacks, including $117 million on an anthrax vaccine that never materialized, all while critics pointed out that Fauci was distorting priorities away from understanding and fighting natural disease outbreaks like influenza. He fought for full control of the federal government response during the HIV/AIDS pandemic and spent hundreds of millions of dollars on an almost tunnel-visioned approach to fighting the then terminal illness with a vaccine. The vaccine never materialized, again, And this came at the expense of years lost researching the antiretroviral drugs we see today, which have turned HIV into a manageable condition rather than a death sentence. And in fact, AZT, the only AIDS treatment to come out of Fauci's federal government research empire, only appeared when the private sector got involved. Again, sound familiar? Oh, and he also made national headlines in the 1980s when he warned that HIV could be spread by routine close contact among family members. More medical misinformation from Fauci spreading false fear and preventing a targeted focus on those most vulnerable, but helping him get more funding. Does that sound familiar? And whether it was screwing up the federal government's response to AIDS, anthrax, or COVID-19, the deepest point of Fauci's failed legacy is simple. He helped delegitimize science itself. The fact is that Fauci is largely responsible for a growing sentiment in the country that experts aren't experts at all. According to Pew Research earlier this year, only 29% of American adults said they had a great deal of confidence in medical scientists to act in the best interests of the public, down from 40% who said this in November 2020. Gee, I wonder why. It might be because Fauci had a symbiotic relationship with the press, with journalists promising Fauci they'd give him favorable coverage. It might be because he avoided questions regarding legitimate concerns about US taxpayer dollars being used to fund gain-of-function research at the virology lab in Wuhan. The fact that we give a single dollar to our enemies is a subject for another time. It might be because despite being a man of scientific integrity, he remained utterly silent when Democrats endorsed nationwide riots in 2020, or when children were forced to wear masks, or when schools were shut because teachers' unions wanted to be paid to stay home and complain, or as vaccines were pushed on increasingly younger people despite their vanishingly small risk levels. All while Fauci rejected any criticism of authoritarian policies as ignorant anti-science propaganda. As his ego grew, he even announced that he was no longer a scientist, but the science.
So it's easy to criticize, but they're really criticizing science.
And why? Well, it's because Fauci is a scientist second and a politician first. Yes, he's a public servant, but he's a public servant who serves himself before anyone or anything else. No one can survive for 30 seconds in DC without knowing how to play the game. You think Fauci survived decades and became a multimillionaire because he's not good at playing politics? And COVID-19 is all the proof we need. Is it a coincidence that Fauci partnered with Deborah Birx and Robert Redfield following the failed AIDS vaccine project to exploit a relationship that lasted for years, agreeing to resign if one of them was fired and promising to never disagree with each other publicly, such as refusing to acknowledge evidence that lockdowns and mask mandates weren't working? All while his objective changed depending on who was in office. Under Trump, he knew that his role was to simultaneously combat COVID-19 and the Republican administration. Under Biden, his role changed to helping the Democrat administration move on. And the mainstream media, who were part of this institutional apparatus, helped at every step along the way. Regardless of whether masks worked or didn't work, or whether any of the science changed, his constant politically helpful flip-flopping created and fueled mistrust and confusion, made worse by his arrogant sneering at the legitimate questions of frustrated American citizens whose lives were being ruined by his nonsense. But moving the goalposts was part of Fauci's entire strategy to keep himself in a position of supposed authority, saying that he changed his public viewpoint based on, quote, his gut feeling that the country is finally ready to hear what he really thinks. They think you're stupid. That's the takeaway here. They know what's best for you, even if you can't see it. And it just so happens that what's best for you is also what's best for them. How convenient. The reason Fauci is the worst is because he's indicative of everything that is wrong with our expert class. It's not about science, or truth, or understanding, but power. Our expert class is no longer populated by actual experts because they are still largely driven by the pursuit of truth. And in today's society, truth is a bad word. Instead, our experts are politicians in lab coats, people who would blow their nose on the truth if it meant more power, or more money, or more influence. And Fauci is the worst of them all. Thanks for joining me. Please don't forget to hit that like button, the notifications bell, subscribe to the channel for other videos, follow me on all social media. I'll see you next time on Off Limits with me, Ian Haworth. Off Limits with Ian Haworth was created by Ian Haworth, produced by Austin Stevens, executive producer Ian Haworth, written by Ian Haworth, Austin Stevens, and Nick Sheehan, Wuhan Lab Rat, Nick Sheehan. Off Limits with Ian Haworth is a Half Crown Productions show. Copyright Half Crown Productions 2022.